Good afternoon, folks, and thanks for joining us. My name is Tim Wheaton with the MMA Sucka Podcast, joined as always by the editor at MMA Sucka, Frazer Krohn. How are you doing today, sir?
You managed to get your words out in the end. It's all good, mate. We were just speaking off air. It's a really good weekend of fights, and then a slightly somber tone coming out sort of last night with the passing of Anthony Johnson. We said, it'd be a miss and it'd be somewhat, disrespectful to a legend of the game to not have to, mention his sad passing. What a fighter! What a scary fighter! A guy that fought at 170, and I saw an Instagram post from him a while ago saying, half the time I made weight, half the time I didn't make weight. But for even to have that sort of mentality to try and get down to 170, I'd say he's up there with the top 5 hardest hitters we've ever seen, not just in the UFC, just in MMA. Yep. And it's a real loss to the MMA world, really.
Oh yeah, people he was putting away guys as tough as Little Nog and Alexander Gustafsson, Glover Teixeira, and just in brutal fashion. He was a super talent. He always got the feeling that he was not of a little bit more time in the gym, a little bit more time studying almost striking technique and stuff like that. He could have been a title contender, because even with the raw talent that he had, the incredible power that he had, he was a title contender in a very competitive light heavyweight weight class. He was doing well. I think he would have done well at welterweight if he wasn't, able if he could make weight and stuff like that. But yeah, he was. It was one of the best talents in MMA history, and he'll be remembered fondly. He's a tough loss because 38 years old, man. Frazer, how I was just that punched me. That hit me hard. Of this dude. First of all, we're gonna see all of our favorite MMA childhood heroes pass away within 10 years. You know what I mean? Exactly. Mark Coleman is in rough shape as it is, but he was only 38. That's
he was competing last year. He was knocking guys out last year in Bellator. He's 1-0 in Bellator since he left the UFC, and he was scheduled to fight Nemkov if we don't forget in last October. But like you say, 38, and it's we had Elias Theodorou about a month and a half ago maybe.
Yeah.
Now Anthony Johnson. These guys aren't old. And I think we need to start appreciating fighters when they're around, because like we said, it's not everybody gets the sort of the happy end. He was still an active Bellator fighter. To have a year and a half off of competition is not a long time. We've seen fighters, UFC fighters this weekend returning after a long layoff. We didn't have any inkling that he was ill. From what I personally hadn't heard anything, and then I saw Errol Hawani's Instagram yesterday. But like I said, it'd be a miss not to have to mention the news on the podcast. And my favorite memory, and maybe it's a slight recency bias, but that knockout of Glover Teixeira. I think the McGregor Diaz 2, that fight itself went under the radar, but it was a co-main event. We were all up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to watch it, and we're thinking, right, no disrespect to Glover and Rumble, but we need this one over and done with quickly so we can get to McGregor Diaz 2, because we've got all the questions. And Johnson delivered for us. 13 seconds, walks forward, throws that quick jab out that he always did, and an uppercut just sent Glover Teixeira to crash into the mat. And this is a Glover Teixeira who, just looking now, is on a 3-fight win streak over OSP, finish, Patrick Cummins, finish, Rashad Evans, finish. This was a dangerous Glover Teixeira who would obviously go on to be, even better than he was back then, But if you just look down his record, Anthony Johnson, some of the guys that he's fought, dating, Dan Hardy, Josh Koscheck, Vitor Belfort, and then we go a little bit more, he holds wins over Phil Davis, Antonio Nogueira, Alex Gustafsson, then loses to Daniel Cormier, but then defeats Jimmy Manuwa by knockout, who, Jimmy Manuwa is one of the best knockout artists we've seen in the light heavyweight division. Dominates Ryan Bader, knocks Glover Teixeira out in the first 15 or 13 seconds of the fight, Then he has that rough fight against Daniel Cormier, but I think that second Daniel Cormier fight is the one where he sent him absolutely careering over the octagon with that big overhand right of his. So
I don't know how Daniel Cormier actually survived that punch either.
I mean, that says more about Daniel Cormier, I think, than it does about the power of Anthony Johnson. But this is a guy that he was so talented for what he was, and he knew, like I said, probably one of the hardest hitters that we've ever seen in like not just the UFC, in MMA. 17 knockouts, 6 decisions across 23 wins. He's a phenomenal talent.
Yeah, I do remember. I think the first fight I saw him was the Tommy Spear knockout, because I thought Tom Spear was quite good, because I think he was just coming off the Ultimate Fighter against Mac Danzig. I want to say I might be wrong on that one, but Tom Spear I thought was quite good, and then he left him slumped against the cage, and that's where you get like the troll meme, because he's kind of just like up against the cage. Next fight, he got the TKO eye injury, which was just a weird way to lose, and then he head kick knockout Kevin Burns right after that one, which is just like. This kid was so talented in his prime of just like, man, even he said it on Instagram, and it was his most recent post of like, man, if I was younger, if I could tell my younger self anything, it'd be smarten up. All that raw talent, like you can just hear him like, oh, I had so much raw talent. I was so good back in the day. If I focused 8% more, I would have been a world champion.
Exactly. And you can tell the kind of person that he was by all the Instagram posts that are coming out from the professional fighters. We've seen hundreds of posts already, just from last night and today. I'm sure we'll get hundreds more of people appreciating Anthony Johnson for the person that he is. And it's nice to see from the MMA community to sort of rally around and appreciate one of the greats of the game, and by the sounds of it, quite a nice person as well.
Yeah, no doubt a Titan, but we had an incredible weekend of fights. Let's get into it. Oh, it was so much fun. It's stuff like this that makes you just like, I love this. I love this sport so much. Alex Pereira, I can never remember which one it is. He, after a competitive back and forth fight in which Israel Adesanya was ahead on the scorecards. I can see the narrative already being misconstrued, but it was it was closer than most people remember. He knocked out Israel Adesanya in the 5th round. He's 3-0 against Israel Adesanya in professional competition, and has maybe won 2 rounds over their entire trilogy. But that's all you got to do when you keep knocking these guys out. Alex Pereira is a guy who maybe couldn't defend a takedown from Khamzat Chimaev right now, or Bo Nickel right now. Probably not. But he's the middleweight world champion because he knocked out Israel Adesanya. He is the least experienced fighter in MMA history, I believe only after Brock Lesnar, to hold a UFC title. And what a fight, what a knockout it was. You can see the power in his hands. Even the jabs were landing heavy. Everything about him. He wasn't winning every round, but he was landing damage every round. Frazer Krohn, what do you think of this one?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you say, the least experienced, I think Izzy, if it was any other champion, if Robert Whittaker had been holding the belt, I think maybe Alex Pereira doesn't get that second least experience, because he's, yes, he's inexperienced in MMA, but it's not like we've just picked this guy up off the street, given him 7 or 8 fights or whatever it is, and he's had hundreds of kickboxing bouts, thousands of rounds across sparring and kickboxing.
Yeah.
And he's facing a kickboxer. So it's just, it kind of turned into, apart from, I think, was it round 3? It kind of turned into who's the better wrestler, which, it was Israel Adesanya in that round. But, for me, it was, if the rounds were 30 seconds longer, we're talking about Israel Adesanya knocking Alex Pereira out in the first round.
No doubt. Those knees were going.
He was out in that, that the 1-2 landed, which buzzed him, and then the left hook right on the, people were saying, oh, that was after the belt. Not a chance. He threw the strike before he began to throw the strike before the bell. So, I got no problems with that shot.
Yep.
And he is lucky that was, Izzy opened up then and not, 10 seconds earlier. Because I think if Izzy would have opened up 10 seconds earlier, he's probably getting a TKO finish. But it was a strange one, because, like you say, Izzy was seemingly, the comparisons have been made to Kamaru Usman, seemingly on his way to a decision victory before he wasn't. Even in that final round, we had the strange low kick sort of interaction where we thought that, I had a horrible feeling as I first saw it that Izzy had, maybe snapped the leg. He obviously kicked the leg of Pereira. Pereira checked it, and it was a momentary sort of, is he stepped back and didn't the weight wasn't going through his leg and whatnot. But that final round, I think, Pereira took the fourth round, sorry, off. Just looking at the stats, the fourth round, there wasn't an awful lot thrown. Alex Pereira, aside from the round where he was, out wrestled, 29 significant strikes thrown, 15 landed, 30 total strikes. So that's not an awful lot in comparison to, if you compare that to the other rounds, it's the round that he landed. He didn't land as many in the first round, but that's the feeling out round. But for me, it's a really difficult one because Israel Adesanya, it's not like he didn't get warned. We saw his game plan. As soon as Alex Pereira came in, he'd hand fight with him. He'd go to the gable grip, sort of try and tie up in the clinch, reverse a position, and then get back into space. That's the in order to not sort of allow himself to be corralled against the fence. But then more and more he was allowing himself to get pushed back against the fence. And we know that if you're in the middle of the octagon, you can back up, cut the angle. When you've got your back up against the cage, you either go at your opponent, who, when he's the harder, heavier hitter, you don't want to be doing that. And with Alex Pereira, you don't want to be sort of pushing Alex Pereira. It's left or right, or you can sort of shoot him for the takedown. Now, it's not like he didn't get warned, Israel Adesanya. He was getting stung with those jabs. Stung. And these were not like, these weren't sort of feeling out setup jabs. These were power jabs. He was getting stung straight down the pipe with these jabs. And so to be so willing to have his back up against the fence and kind of rely on head movement rather than shelling up and allowing those shots to sort of bounce off the guard. It's a brave tactic, but obviously it didn't quite come off on this one.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed as well. Like, even in rounds where Israel was edging or winning, he didn't have a lot of cage control, and he was always giving up the center, where Alex Pereira constantly taking the center, constantly understands ring craftsmanship, constantly understands control. And even if he was losing those rounds, he was still landing damage. Like you said, those are stinging, heavy jabs. Alex Pereira somehow made weight for this one. I don't quite... He's got one of those, like, I do want to say, if he was a punch boxer before he was a kickboxer, and that comes across because his hands look crisp in there. He's throwing really nice combinations. That's what you should look like when you're throwing. That's what your stance should look like when you're throwing power. But he also has that superhuman ability. It's not just stance. It's not just technique. It's not just, what he does in the gym. This guy has power, because think of Israel Adesanya, and this is what Combat Chronicles was talking about the other day. Israel Adesanya has had 70 kickboxing fights. He's had half a dozen boxing fights. He's had 25 MMA fights. He's been knocked out twice. Both times by Alex Pereira. Like, Jan Blachowicz couldn't do this. Over 5 rounds, Jared Cannonier, Robert Whittaker couldn't even get close to doing this. Yoel Romero couldn't quite get close to doing this. Alex Pereira does it twice? What is this man made of? Like, what is his nickname?
Steel.
Steel.
He's just made out of steel, the man.
It is unreal. Yeah, go ahead.
He's got that, whether it sort of only comes out against Israel Adesanya, but he's got that mean, nasty streak. It's not like, when we saw him fight Sean Strickland, for him, I feel that was just competition. For him, I feel like, first of all, I think he probably looked at Sean Strickland and thought, does this guy know who I am? What is he doing with his hands there? But then after he sort of processed that, I genuinely believe that Alex Pereira saw that as competition rather than a fight. I don't think he saw too much danger in Sean Strickland knocking him out. And I don't think he sort of was disrespected by Sean Strickland. I think he almost felt disrespected by Israel Adesanya, that, Adesanya's come over, he's the bigger name, he's the A side in this one. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be mean. You could tell with every leg kick against Sean Strickland, they were sort of slapping leg kicks. Against Israel Adesanya, he was turning the hip over. The high kicks, the fact that he was staring him down from the second he walked in the octagon, when Bruce Buffer was saying all the sponsors and blah, 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 blah. 10 minutes, big spiel. Alex Pereira didn't take his eyes off Israel Adesanya. And, on the other side, I think Adesanya took this one extremely seriously, probably more seriously than he's taken any fight in his UFC career. There was no theatrics with the walkout.
Nope.
There was no, dancing. There was no.
There's no hand signs during the announcement or anything like that. Yeah.
And this was a guy that was dialed in, ready to go 5 hard rounds with someone who, let's be honest, Alex Pereira probably weighed 210, 220. He was huge.
Easily. Yeah.
And it's, we'll go on to talk about the Dustin Poirier fight, but that looked like two different guys in a different weight class.
Yeah.
And how he makes weight is truly beyond me, but he did, and he's the new middleweight champion of the world, and deservedly so. To be the champ, you got to beat the champ, and he not only beat the champ, but he finished the champ. I have no problems with the finish whatsoever. The stoppage, sorry. I know there's been a little bit of talk online. There was an early stoppage, but we don't need to see guys slumped face down on the mat. Israel did not have his hands up. He did not have his wits about him, and he couldn't intelligently defend himself. I've got no problems with that stoppage whatsoever.
At first I'm always of like, let the fighters finish the fight. That's always my attitude. I am that's my attitude. However, if this was in a boxing ring, he would have slumped right out. He would have fallen out because he was leaning against the cage and he was looking at the ground. And honestly, after having more than 100 fights at professional level of competition, it's okay to protect him a little bit. It's okay that he doesn't take 4 more left hooks to actually cause brain damage. It's okay to protect him. He wasn't going to recover. It wouldn't have made a difference if he took 4 more shots or something like that to really put him out of his misery. It didn't make a difference. That fight was done at that point. And
this is in the 5th round. This isn't in the 1st round where maybe he's got that cardiovascular to recover and and get off the fence and maybe shoot for a takedown, grab a clinch. He was not intelligently defending himself. I've got no problems with the stoppage. And it's Mark Goddard. He's one of the most experienced referees in the UFC, and he doesn't have a history of questionable stoppages, to say the least. And we always have to ask. Sometimes when people are stopped on their feet in that manner, and as soon as they're stopped, they jump straight back up and say, "Oh no, what are you doing?" I don't. I think Izzy even admitted. I don't think Eugene Behrman. He said after speaking with his coach and speaking with the ref, he was like, in the instant after, of course, I'm annoyed that he stopped the fight, but it hasn't come out that Izzy's. I think Izzy accepts that was a good stoppage, and like I say, in that situation, if it was if that was in glory, he's either getting a standing 8 count or he's out the ring.
Yeah,
I don't need to see Israel Adesanya face down flat on the canvas because that's the way it was going. And I think it was a really good stoppage.
I in hindsight, I absolutely agree with you. But let me ask you: so we watched 4 rounds of action. 5th round, Alex Pereira somehow gets it done, gets the TK. What was your first reaction to this?
I was stunned. I had. Because to be honest, it wasn't, he was stinging him with the jabs, but he hadn't really landed that left hook.
No.
He hadn't really landed it. And I was thinking, of what Izzy was going to say and I thought he maybe take him down in the 5th and then get on the mic and say, look, this is MMA. We're allowed to grapple. We're allowed to do this. And I think in hindsight, of course, he should have double-legged him and tried to take him down in the final round. And
of course,
be waking up the middleweight champion again. But it went from shocked and stunned because, no disrespect to Alex Pereira, I don't think he's the best middleweight in the world.
No, of course not.
I genuinely, Israel Adesanya, I thought was the best middleweight in the world.
Yeah, right.
Alex Pereira, I think, gets beaten by 3 or 4 of the top 10. Just styles make fight. If we just look at the rankings, let me just pull the rankings up quickly.
That was the next point of like
Robert Whittaker beats him handily, in my opinion. The size will be an issue for Whittaker, but once Whittaker gets his hands on him, I think it's
I agree with you.
I think Marvin Vettori is quite a tough fight for him. I generally do think Marvin Vettori is a tough fight because he
actually has good takedowns.
He's got decent takedowns, and he's a gamer and he can take a shot. I mean, like we say, Alex Pereira hits like nobody else, but he can still take a shot. Obviously Sean Strickland doesn't have a chance, as we saw. Jared Cannonier hasn't really got the style to trouble Alex Pereira.
Yeah.
Derek Brunson, if he gets that takedown, it could be a long night. And yes, Derek Brunson's ability to take a shot in recent times is certainly questionable. With that being
absolutely.
said, if he gets that takedown, I mean, Israel Adesanya managed to keep him down. Israel Adesanya had hooks in at one point where I thought he was even going to be able to slip the rear naked choke in. If he
That's
had
true.
more, knowledge of the ground game, it's easy for us to say from having not been punched in the head by Alex Pereira 2 seconds before, but it seemed that the back take was there, and he didn't go for it.
A
Derek Brunson
slicker
takes it
grappler
back.
would have got it.
I
Absolutely.
mean,
But
if
let
you
me
look
ask
at
you. Yeah, go
Robert Whittaker, Robert Whittaker takes the back and chokes Alex Pereira out in that situation, in my opinion.
So the next big middleweight fight, Robert Whittaker will be fighting Paulo Costa. That's upcoming, I think, early 2023. You also have Israel Adesanya maybe hanging out for a rematch. I don't think there's anyone else in that division you could even make the argument for. There's nobody there, really. What do you do with this middleweight division? Do you just wait for Robert Whittaker to win and then get his title back, and then he can fight Israel for another time for some reason? Or do you put Israel back in for an auto rematch?
Yeah. See, this is the thing: is Israel was lapping the competition. He's fought Robert Whittaker twice, beating him twice. Marvin Vettori twice, beating him twice. Dominated Jaron Cannonier, knocked out Paulo Costa, sent Yoel Romero to Bellator. Defeated Calvin Gastelum back in the day in that epic fight.
Yep.
They, went up in weight. We've all realized now that Izzy just isn't built for 205 on such short notice. As far as it wasn't a short notice fight, but he didn't have the time like John Jones has to put the muscle on. He's not a naturally big guy. We saw that on Saturday night. So the new blood at the top of the division is good to have Alex Pereira. There's fresh matchups for Alex Pereira. Like we say, Robert Whittaker, Paulo Costa, not Sean Strickland, but Jared Cannonier, Marvin Vettori. These guys are all people that Alex Pereira hasn't faced before. However, if you look at the win streaks of all these guys, it's
mixed.
It gets a bit dicey, Obviously, Paulo Costa's coming off a one. He's dominated by Marvin Vettori, but then dominates Luke Rockhold. Now, how good a win is that Luke Rockhold one? We've got questions asked. Robert Whittaker coming off the dominant decision of Marvin Vettori. If you can pick up another win over Costa, you've got to say that he's favourite for the title next. But Jared Cannonier lost his last fight. Derek Brunson lost his last fight. Sean Strickland lost his last fight. Marvin Vettori lost his last fight. And then you're looking at sort of Jack Hermansson won his last fight, but against Chris Curtis, who's much further down the division.
Chris Curtis, I like Chris Curtis, but let's be real about his skill set.
Yeah, and now he's scheduled to fight Joaquin Buckley, who's not exactly at the upper echelons of the division. The thing is with
that's a banger though. That's a good fight.
Oh yeah, I'm excited for that without a doubt. But does it have title implications? Absolutely not. The only people I can see in the top 10 without a fight at the moment, Andre Muniz. That is a tough fight for Poatan.
It really is.
And I hate to say it because he's not the most well-known guy, and he's riding a 9-fight win streak, undefeated in the UFC, just coming off the win over Uriah Hall, or say just it was July. But I do think we wait for that Paulo Costa Robert Whittaker fight, and then we go. The winner of that faces Poatan, but at the same time, that's February the 11th. Now, let's say that's an absolute war. Those guys have got to sit out for another 5 or 6 months. 4 or 5 months, let's say. Let's say Robert Whittaker wins the fight, but gets a bad cut. He's not fighting until October, November. Mm-hmm. So you're talking almost a year before we see Alex Pereira defend the belt. So why not do the rematch with Izzy in April?
Yeah,
after we already know, and then the winner of this, no questions, whether it's because that's the difficult thing. You do the rematch and Izzy wins, you then have to do a third fight, leaving Robert Whittaker on the shelf again.
I know.
I don't think that they'll book anything before the Robert Whittaker fight. They won't book a rematch before the Robert Whittaker, and I haven't seen Izzy of course wants it, and I think he deserves it. If you look at his scheduling since he joined the UFC, he's got 14 fights in the UFC. Mm-hmm. In 2021, he fought twice, including that loss to Jan Blachowicz. This was his third fight this year. He fought Whittaker, Cannonier, and now Alex Pereira, twice in 2020, three times in 2019, four times in 2018 since joining. And this is a guy that quite literally takes on all comers. He's never pulled out of a fight injured. He never seems to get injured, which is phenomenal. And I think he deserves that. He was looking at tying Anderson Silva's middleweight record.
I know.
And he just fell off the wayside a little bit. Kamaru Usman seems like he's getting an immediate rematch. So I think Israel Adesanya deserves an immediate rematch.
Based on that standard, I can see the argument. I can see
logically it makes sense, but at the same time, welterweight's got a lot less challenges than the middleweight. And like we said, Robert Whittaker, in my opinion, plays with Alex Pereira. He uses that in and out movement, that karate style, to leg kick him, throw that left hook over the top, and get the body lock takedown, and do that for 5 rounds.
Yeah, I completely agree.
We'll have to see if Paulo Costa even makes that walk, to be honest, because he's got a history of pulling out fights, Paulo Costa. So we'll see in February, I guess.
One thing about Paulo Costa is that he someone pointed this out, I think, on Reddit. He doesn't have a win over anyone who's active or not retired. Like, his wins are Luke Rockhold, Romero, Uriah Hall, Johnny Hendricks. Like, you can see the drop off fairly quick. But yeah, that's it. Those are his major wins in the UFC. A bunch of guys who are retired.
And the 2 top 10 guys he's faced, losses.
Yeah,
pretty badly scored as well. He was pretty badly dominated by Marvin Vettori, and obviously knocked out by Israel Adesanya in the second round.
Yeah, and that was
interesting. So I didn't. Yeah, there's an article in there somewhere.
Like, is this guy overrated?
And you then got Robert Whittaker, who has faced a killer's row at both welterweight and middleweight.
He's the uncrowned champion, considering he's beaten like 8 of the top 10. Like, you know what I mean? Of like, this guy Robert Whittaker has beaten the division already, and he just can't beat the one guy ahead of him.
Which is now I think that's the issue with we'll go on to talk about the co-main event. Yeah. Weili Zhang. What do we do with Zhang Weili next? The fight itself, for me, it was entertaining. Actually, there's good scrambles in it.
Yeah,
there's a good finish. It's sort of a rear naked crucifix choke kind of thing going on. Not quite sure what it's down as a rear naked choke. I don't quite know how you describe it. Technically. Really good scramble. I thought a takedown defense looked good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I completely agree.
All I've got to say on the fight, to be honest, it kind of played out how we thought it would be. Zhang Weili was too powerful, and just her stand-up was too good for Carla Esparza. Esparza came to fight, which is something that she didn't do against Rose, which I'm happy about. But
yeah,
it's the least. That's the least surprising fight on the main card for me.
Well, yeah, Carla Esparza, she should be in a weight class below. In all honesty, she's a 105er in terms of her actual size. Like, Weili Zhang is not big for this. She's buff for this weight class, but she looked like she was in a world apart here. But yeah, like you said, went for a crucifix. Daniel Cormier said, "Oh, she doesn't know what she's doing." Daniel Cormier, what are you watching right now? She's gonna like him. What was that? That was one of those weird Dominic Cruz calls where you're just like, what are you? What the hell are you saying at the moment?
Are you sure?
Gets the choke. However, what I do like about Weili Zhang is that professionally and in the cage, she has always shown the attitude that when it gets tough, she improves. She works harder because of it. In the cage, like her deep fights with Rose and her deep fights with Joanna, there were wars and they were close. When things got tough, her attitude was that I'm going to push forward here. And same thing in her career. She started on a loss. She switched to kickboxing, had another loss. That's enough there for most people to retire. You start your professional career on 2 losses. And what'd she do? She improved. She got better. She went back in the gym, got on like a 30-fight win streak, entered the UFC, won a title, had a couple of losses, and she switched gyms. She just tried different gyms all around the world. She spent some time in training Muay Thai in Thailand. Then she went wrestling with Henry Cejudo. That is an attitude of a person who is nonstop improving and really believes in themselves and really believes in martial arts. Her attitude, her charisma, she kind of marks the best of why we like this sport so much.
Yeah, for sure. And I think she, I put an article out last week that I wrote just after the Joanna Jędrzejczyk second fight, before her and Carla were even announced. She's quite a rare breed. She's got to the pinnacle of MMA and is still looking to really round out her game. Now we've only seen really in recent times Kamaru Usman do that, where he's relied much more heavily on the jab and on the stand up. You look at let's say take Islam Makhachev, he is not going to be an elite kickboxer ever. He is very elite at wrestling, and he's good at what he does, and he does what he's good at, and it works. The same with Khabib. Alexander Volkanovski, he'll mix in takedowns, but predominantly he's a stand-up fighter. Israel Adesanya, yes, he mixed in takedowns against Pereira, but he is a stand-up fighter. He's not going to come out with a wrestling game plan.
Yes.
Zhang Weili is now coming out with a wrestling game plan in fights against Rose, in fights against Joanna the second time.
Yep.
And she's ever evolving. I think this myth of, there's a difference between being loyal to your gym and your team and wanting to personally improve. Now, you look at, on paper, the two or the three best women in the UFC at the moment. Zhang Weili has changed gyms multiple times, trained with different training partners, and, is evolving.
Mm-hmm.
Valentina Shevchenko isn't really, she's got the same coach, but she's constantly moving around different gyms and trying out different sparring partners, different training partners. And Amanda Nunes left ATT and looked phenomenal against Juliana Pena. And now you compare that to, let's say, a Conor McGregor, who's very loyal to SBG Ireland.
Yeah, needlessly so.
But, you can't tell me that the contingent of Irish sparring partners, and yes, McGregor's got enough money to fly in whoever he wants, but the facilities at SBG, it's not one of these mega gyms, an AKA, an ATT, Rufus Sport, any of these, Henry Hooft's new gym, I think, was it Hard Knocks or 20, I don't know what it's called these days. It's changed about, because it used to be the Black Zillions, didn't it? And now it's Hard Knocks 365 or something like that. Anyway, Henry Hooft's gym, and you've got Sarah Weidman Sarah Longo, who have got Chris Weidman, and they've got quite a small team around them, but Stephen Thompson's in and out of that gym, but he predominantly, I think with Zhang Weili, she is shown that you by all means be loyal to your training partners in your team. If they got you to the dance, don't just drop them straight away. But she's obviously sat down and had that discussion with her team, saying, look, I went through a war with Joanna. I don't want to be doing that every single fight because I don't have that strong wrestling base. Let me go and train at, Fighters Ready, Henry Cejudo's gym.
Yeah.
And let me work on my wrestling. And we saw that against Rose in the second fight. We saw that against Joanna in the second fight. And we saw that against Carla Esparza, who is the best wrestler in this division, not named Tatiana Suarez, but, she's got an asterisk next to her name. But Carla Esparza is the best wrestler in this division and one of the best control wrestlers in this division. And yet she wasn't able to. She's credited with one takedown, of which she had, 53 seconds control time, which isn't bad. But when you compare that to Zhang Weili, who didn't get a takedown but had a minute of control time, and in that second round, to get someone like Carlos Esparza in a crucifix and then be able to finish the fight in a crucifix, a reverse crucifix as well. Obviously both women were facing the ceiling, whereas with Molly McCann and Erin Blanchfield, she had her in the crucifix, and Blanchfield was raining down elbows. It's impressive. You can't wrestle with one of the best wrestlers in the division and not appreciate her skills. And I've just been looking, we did say, what's next? We always have to ask for the champion, what's next for the champion? I think this division match makes itself quite handily, in my opinion. You've got probably three main options for the title fight. Amanda Lemos, who's coming off that big TKO of Marina Rodriguez a few weeks ago. You've got a Rose Namajunas third fight, which for me, personally, I don't think she deserves. She lost the fight against Carla Esparza and didn't really come to fight. So, why are we then rewarding her after that bout with a rematch? Or the Yang Xiaonan fight, an all Chinese fight, which I think is potentially the way that they'll go.
Yeah, I could do that.
I then think you do Carla Esparza and Mackenzie Dern, because they obviously want Mackenzie Dern to get a win.
Yeah.
Both women are questionable in their stand-up, but Carla Esparza will look to take Mackenzie Dern down, and Mackenzie Dern will look to get the fight. That's Mackenzie Dern's wheelhouse there. So how does Carla play that one? A win over Carla Esparza, the former champion for Mackenzie Dern, probably gets her a title shot because of who she is and what kind of a name she is. And then, Marina Rodriguez versus Rose Namajunas, for me, that makes quite a lot of sense. Both women coming off a loss. Both women were on, Marina Rodriguez has won more fights than Rose Namajunas. She was on a 4-fight win streak and then lost. Rose on a 3-fight win streak and then lost. It makes a lot of sense to me to do that. And then you've got Amanda Lemos sitting out, but she can be the alternate for the Yang Xiaonan versus Zhang Weili, or you can do Amanda Lemos versus Zhang Weili. There's options here, but I think they do Carla Esparza, Mackenzie Dern, and then the new champion or the second time champion against either Lemos or Yang Xiaonan next. Whether they want to really push that Chinese market and do an all Chinese title fight, I think that's potentially the way they go, especially as Dana was talking about getting out of the Apex next year, going on the road a lot more. Finally. Or do you give it to the woman that probably deserves it in Amanda Lemos? It's a difficult one.
Yeah. I'm sure the UFC is jumping for joy that they actually have a Chinese champion, because they kept trying to push Kung Lee when they went to China. I'm like, you guys, this is the one Asian guy. It was enough for whatever. We'll go to China now. We have an Asian. Anyway, let's talk about Dustin Poirier and Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler must be lying about his height. There's no possible way. What does he come? 5'8"? No, he's not. He's not 5'8". No,
5'1" at best.
He is tiny, and he fights low. This was a battle. Dustin the Diamond Poirier. I criticize him for his age, taking damage, all that kind of stuff coming into this fight, but he did Dustin Poirier things. He dug deep in the first round when he needed, despite giving up most of the first round and just getting beat up. He still closed that round and won because of his flurry, and it was that 1 second flurry. It's like a power up in Mortal Kombat or a power up in Tekken of if you beat up Dustin Poirier enough, he powers up, and then he'll have 1 minute of perfect, precise flurries, and you won't survive that flurry. This guy has moments of absolute brilliance. Gets taken down and dominated in the third round or in the second round after getting slammed. He got suplexed in the second round. Dustin Poirier rallies back in the third round, gets the rear naked choke, celebrates. Put this guy. He's beaten everybody in that violence division. He competed against maybe the best that the lightweight division has ever been in history. He had wars against Max Holloway, Eddie Alvarez, Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler, all unforgettable wars. And this guy, put him in the Hall of Fame already. He is one of the most exciting fighters in the sports history. What do you have to say on him?
Without a doubt. And, like you said, you beat up Dustin Poirier for 3.5 minutes, and then he has that minute where he beats you up, and then you got 30 seconds where you're like, shit, what has just I was just winning this fight, and now I've just Michael Chandler, I've just been dropped. I've just been almost finished in that final round. And interestingly, I'm just looking at the stats here. I know stats don't tell the whole picture, but Michael Chandler landed less shots than Poirier in that first round.
I didn't know.
He landed 7 less shots, but he did land those 2 takedowns. But it's damage. It's damage for me. And Poirier obviously won that first round on damage alone. He dropped Michael Chandler.
Yep.
Michael Chandler is the most exciting fighter to watch who has a losing UFC record. Let's not forget he's 2-3 in the UFC now. He's been to decision once in that fight of the year with Gaethje. Yep. I'd say this fight was almost even better than the Gaethje fight. Obviously, it didn't last the full 3 rounds, but I just question how good Michael Chandler could be if he just took 5 or 10% off, because he's clearly got the intelligence there. He hurt Dustin Poirier. He took Dustin Poirier to the floor. That second round, he dominated Dustin Poirier on the ground. And then the third round, he kind of looked for the same. He leaves himself far too open. And Dustin said in his post-fight speech, he comes in with these looping shots. If he would have shot straight, he probably would have got me out of there. Now, that either helps Michael Chandler a lot in his training going forward, so he'll throw more straight shots, or that hinders him when now all opponents are going to know if it's fairly obvious to see, but if it's that obvious that Poirier says, look, you would have got me out of there.
Mm-hmm.
I think, but, what a fight. It's just a fun fight. Yeah. We don't see Dustin Poirier dominated like that often. Yes, he was dominated like that against Khabib. He was winning the Charles Oliveira fight until he kind of wasn't, in my opinion. He dropped Charles, I think, twice in that fight. Mm-hmm. And this one, like I said, with Michael Chandler, he is so good for 3 minutes of a round. He was so good for all of that second round when he went back to his wrestling. But he's just, 5 or 6 post-fight bonuses in 5 fights.
Insane.
he's come to the UFC to make money. If he doesn't become a champion, he doesn't become a champion. I don't think he will become a champion because he's just got that style where, you know, just looking at his record, he wins one, he loses two. He wins one, he loses one. You know, will he ever be a UFC champion? I don't think so. Will he fight for a belt again? Quite possibly. You know, if he gets a big win next time out, who knows? You know, and for Dustin, I think the shine was taken off this fight slightly with the announcement of Volkanovski Islam Makhachev before the fight itself. Why they didn't wait till maybe like this week to announce that, I'm not quite sure. But because, you know, Michael Chandler, if he would have knocked Dustin Poirier out in stunning fashion like he did against Tony Ferguson, he's got two massive knockouts over two massive names. He should be arguably fighting for a title, but they'd already announced that he wouldn't be. You know, and it took a little bit of the shine off the consequences of the fight, should we say? But it's good to see Dustin back in the win column. Obviously, you know, he had 3 fights in last year, the 2 McGregor fights, and then the Charles Oliveira loss. And he sat out for quite a while after that Charles Oliveira loss. Just looking now, you know, that was December of last. So it's almost a year before we saw. And, you know, we were on the show last week questioning, does Dustin Poirier still want it? And I think that first round really showed that, yes, he does still want it. He can take licks and keep on coming forwards. And it's difficult to know what to do with Dustin next because you've got the titles locked up until, you know, at least February next year with Volk and Islam. He's just had the Charles Oliveira fight. He's already fought Justin Gaethje. He's fought Michael Chandler. And then you're looking at either Rafael Fiziev or Beneil Dariush.
They're
2
bad
guys
fight
that
for him,
nobody wants to fight.
No.
You know, nobody wants to fight those guys because, with the greatest respect to both of them, they're not huge names, but they're dangerous fights. So, you know, if you're Dustin Poirier, it's risk and reward. You know, the risk is I go 2-1 in my last 1-2 in my last 3. I potentially get, you know, Fiziev is a horrible fight for anybody.
Yeah,
you come out, even if you beat Fiziev, you come out hurting.
Yeah,
you could just get more by Beneil Dariush like he did against Mateus Gamrot and just dominated. And you know, you're looking over your opponent, and he seems to still be in first gear, and he's just going through the motions with Beneil Dariush. It's such a difficult one. I think maybe Dariush might be the alternate for the title fight. I know that they often do that, but for Poirier, I think I really don't know. Islam's a bad matchup for him. You know, if he's getting taken down and dominated by Michael Chandler, who is a much smaller guy, Islam plays with him on the floor, in my opinion. We saw that against Khabib.
That wouldn't even sell.
Exactly.
Like no one's buying that one, and I don't think Dustin's buying that one either.
No, exactly. And then, you know, I think it's either a Fiziev fight or a Justin Gaethje rematch.
Gaethje's fine. Yeah, Gaethje's
I'd watch it because Gaethje is less erratic these days. I think that would make for a more entertaining fight. But, you know, maybe we get a chance. I don't know what you do with Dustin Poirier next because he's, in my opinion, just stylistically, he's a long way away from a title shot. Or, you know, the UFC aren't stupid. They know that title fight doesn't really sell.
No one's buying that one. And I'm not sure that he beats, like you said, Fiziev, Dariush are major risks. But, like, there are lightweight has that, like, new breed crawling in. And none of the old breed, like Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier, actually want to fight any of those guys. I've seen some people pitch Colby Covington, but again, that's a terrible fight for Dustin Poirier. He doesn't win that fight at all.
It's rough, isn't it? Yeah, and obviously we got Dana coming out and saying they're working on Covington versus Hamzat, which is a far more entertaining fight.
Yes, it is. It's interesting.
Also, you know, with the greatest respect to Dustin, let's say he goes up to 170 and pulls off an upset and does defeat Colby. Kamaru probably beats him.
Yeah,
I think Leon Edwards is too much of a sniper for him. Khamzat plays with him because he's too big. You know, it's kind of, what does that fight really do? It's just a don't disrespect my team kind of fight. Like the Masvidal Covington. We knew the outcome of that one before it even started. We knew how that fight was going to go.
I know.
And you know, it was on reflection kind of pointless, but it is what it is, I guess.
What about Jorge Masvidal versus Dustin Poirier?
I think they're good friends.
Oh, that's right.
I get mixed up on which
they train. I get mixed up on who was feuding with who, and
yeah. That's the problem with ATT. It's like everyone kind of hates each other a little bit, but some people are friends.
But you are
yeah,
right. One thing that we've talked about with Michael Chandler is like even coming off his title loss to Charles Oliveira is if you fought 10% more defensively, you would have been a world champion. I
for sure.
guarantee it. Against Justin Gaethje, same thing. 10% more defensively, you probably would have won that fight. Dustin Poirier, just a little bit more defensive, but that's just not his game. That's just not his attitude. And we like to see him get hurt, I guess.
Yeah, I mean he's getting paid as well. You know, these post-fight bonuses, 50K each time. He's what 5 fights in the UFC. He's got 250K on top of his pay. He'll get
Yeah.
pay-per-view points probably because this was the fight that people were looking forward to as far as entertainment's concerned on the main card.
Yep.
He's great on the mic. He's great off. He's great promoting fights off the mic on Instagram and whatnot, and doing media interviews. And at the end of the day, he's had his MMA career in Bellator. He's a Bellator champion. He's 36 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
At 36, he still looks like he's got quite a lot left in him. Yes, he's been hurt in every single fight pretty much of his career since dating back to the Eddie Alvarez one fight. Yes, he's been rocked in pretty much all of his UFC fights, but he's entertaining and he doesn't look like he's slowing down at all. He's got a crazy strength of schedule so far. Since joining the UFC in January 2021, he fought Dan Hooker, and he had 4 fights, of which, a lot of them have been wars. That Tony Ferguson one wasn't a war, but he lost that first round convincingly. It's he doesn't look like he's slowing down his strength of schedule at all. I can see him returning in April, May next year, and fighting another top 10 guy.
Also, even his run in Bellator before he was coming to the UFC, it was just a row of like Benson Henderson, Brent Brimus, Patricio Pitbull, Benson Henderson again. Like this guy was working against amazing fights. Like he was in tough fights all the time, and yeah, most of them were really good. Sometimes it's like in Bellator he would switch of like the most entertaining man in the world, some super boring lay-in pro wrestler, and he would just swap between these two. But in the UFC, he's just the most entertaining man in the world.
Exactly. I think I don't think anyone would begrudge him coming out next time. Let's say he fights a Fiziev next time, Michael Chandler versus Rafael Fiziev, which would be a banger, and just take Fiziev down and just for three rounds, 5 rounds, just lie on top of it. I think he's almost earned a quote unquote boring decision victory because he's had 2 potential fight of the year candidates, a mad fight against Charles Oliveira, crazy knockouts over Dan Hooker and Tony Ferguson. Just rein it in a little bit.
Yeah, just take a minute for yourself. Just like collect yourself a little bit more. We also had some sad stuff. There was a ton of sad stuff on this fight. Chris Gutierrez just sent Frankie Edgar again. Just like this was, man, we never wanted this going in. Dan Hooker beat up some guy who couldn't get a takedown. And I'll give you one more. Ryan Spann.
Yeah.
Sent Dominic Cruz. Really, I don't know what to say. Hopefully into retirement because this is not looking good.
Yeah, the Frankie Edgar one and the Dominic Reyes one.
Those are sad.
It's just I mean, to be fair, with the Frankie Edgar one, I think that flying knee probably knocks out anyone at bantamweight.
Yeah.
As opposed to the Ryan Spann one, I don't think at light heavyweight you should be being knocked out by a jab.
I know.
Which says all you can't. And by all intents and purposes, Reyes was on a really good in a really good headspace this week heading into the fight. He looked, and no disrespect to Ryan Spann, but it's a drop down in competition. Jiri Prochazka last time out, Jan Blachowicz, John Jones, Chris Weidman, Volkan Ozdemir, OSP, OSP, and then Jared Cannonier.
This is the easiest fight he's had in the UFC since he joined.
And he's being knocked out. He's now being knocked out early. That's the first round. That's the first round knockout. It's not. I think Reyes. It's done. I can see Reyes joining the PFL because Thiago Santos has gone over there to compete at light heavyweight. They've got a fairly decent light heavyweight division, and he's still a fairly decent name. But I just don't know. His career seems to have fallen off a cliff since that John. I think he was so convinced that he beat John Jones that maybe he's got a little bit of a complex of I beat John Jones. None of these guys are John Jones. I can beat all of these guys, and obviously it hasn't quite played out. And it's not only that he's losing to these guys now, but he's getting. John Jones decision loss. That was a 5-round, pretty bad war. Jan Blachowicz, huge knockout. Jiri Prochazka, out cold knockout again. And this one,
good one.
out cold knockout, and from a power jab. Now, I'm not, no disrespect to Ryan Spann,
No,
but he shouldn't be, he shouldn't be knocking people out with a. No one, should be knocking people out with a jab. He's got 6 TKOs on his record.
that's a good point too.
One is now a power jab. It shouldn't be happening. But going back to the Frankie Edgar one,
we knew this one. We knew this was going to be sad,
for
and
sure.
and then it was.
And it's a kind of a lose for Chris Gutierrez. He scores up huge. The post-fight bonuses are what they are, but how he didn't get a post-fight bonus for that? He dominated Frankie Edgar for the 2 minutes that it lasted, and he gets a flying knee knockout and doesn't get a post-fight bonus. But it is what it is. But it's. I think Frankie almost kind of knew going into that one that it's looking a bit dicey for him. He's what 2-6 in his last 8.
Oh, jeez, that's bad.
Taking into account that this guy he'd had a storied career and never been finished. He then was finished by Brian Ortega, finished by Chan Sung Young, finished by Corey Sandhagen, finished by Marlon Vera, finished by Chris Gutierrez. It's the right time to hang up the gloves, and I don't think anyone's begrudging him to doing so.
No, and it really should have been another like Legends fight, like a Dominic Cruz or a Cub Swanson or someone like that. Why they did this one was beyond me. However, I think Frankie Edgar probably is underrated in terms of all-time greats. Like, it wasn't just his incredible multiple victories over BJ Penn. He was the first guy to really stop BJ Penn in his prime. He had amazing back and forth fights with like Gray Maynard, Benson Henderson. They may be official losses on his record, but those were contentious at the time. Those were controversial. Maybe Benson Henderson did win those fights. He pushed Jose Aldo a bunch of times when they fought. Chad Mendes, Uriah Faber. Like, this guy is in that all-time greats class that I always put with like Dan Henderson and Shogun and guys like this. Where like you're not in the top 5, maybe not in the top 10 all-time greats, but you deserve to be ranked among all-time greats in MMA.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I going back, I think that people aren't making enough of that Chad Mendes win. He knocked Chad Mendes out cold.
Yeah.
And
when it mattered.
Yeah, exactly. And when Chad Mendes, I think was Chad Mendes just coming off the McGregor. Yeah, so Chad Mendes was just coming off the McGregor fight. So that was a Chad Mendes who was in. He was in and around the title shot. And realistically, Frankie should have got a shot at Conor McGregor if McGregor hadn't have messed around with going up to lightweight and whatnot. Frankie was the next logical. He's riding a 5-fight win streak. I mean, just look at this 5-fight win streak. You got Charles Oliveira, BJ Penn, Cub Swanson, Uriah Faber, Chad Mendes.
But that was late career. That was after he lost the title. This was like his mid-career. He got this win streak.
Featherweight. So he dropped down to one weight class to a weight class. Like, this is finally Frankie's natural weight class. Thank God. He was always undersized at 155.
Yeah.
And now he's killing guys at one. One of my favorite Frankie Edgar fights is when he put manners on Yair Rodriguez. That's not because I dislike Yair Rodriguez, but Rodriguez coming into the fight undefeated in the UFC.
Yeah.
He had that main event against BJ Penn, which I still have problems with, but it is what it is. And then, you just get absolutely dominated by Frankie Edgar, kind of saying, look, have a little bit of respect for the old guard. And that's what Frankie is. I think we'll miss him now that he's gone. But I think the last few fights were definitely fights where he's been turned into someone from the UFC. This was the UFC sort of turning him into someone who you can make a name of. Chris Gutierrez, of course he's going to take that fight because he's an elite fighter and he can make a name. Frankie Edgar's a big name. Marlon Vera needed that win and he got the win. Corey Sandhagen needed that win and he got the win. At the time, Brian Ortega, when they fought UFC 222, Brian Ortega was the guy. He was supposed to get the title shot against Max Holloway, and then Brian Ortega stepped in. In my opinion, I completely agree with you. He should have got a Dominic Cruz or maybe like a sort of that kind of esque, maybe a Rafael Assunção, where they're not, where they're unlikely to knock him dead like they did. You don't want Frankie's last time in the octagon to have been him absolutely laid out, but it is what it is. It did happen, but that takes nothing away from what a quality career he's had.
No, I completely co-sign. He's had one of the most incredible careers, and the UFC does do that like legends fight every once in a while. Like Anthony Pettis, one of his last fights was Donald Cerrone. Like Anthony Pettis, Donald Cerrone makes sense. Two legends just going to war. One guy leaves the UFC because whatever. One guy's clearly over the hill. I don't know. I don't get it. But anyway, yeah, that's enough of Frankie Edgar talk. Let him sail off into the sunset as just like an amazing coach or whatever he's going to do now. What else? Aaron Blanchfield put a wrestling clinic, literally just a wrestling instructional, a basic 1-2 wrestling on Molly McCann. Why did UFC do this to Molly? Do they not want her to be a star? Do they just want her to constantly be in the outside the 15 or something? Why?
That's it. Why? 93 strikes landed to 7. I think is in my opinion, this was always going to go. Aaron Blanchfield, solid, absolutely quality wrestler. Molly McCann, every time she's been exposed, has been in the wrestling realm. We'll work that out. And Kimura was nasty. I didn't think she was going to tap. I thought she was going to pull the shoulder out, but luckily she did tap. Molly is never going to be a top. But by the way that they match her, she's going to struggle to be a top 10 fighter. But she's always going to be an exciting fighter, which I think is really important. And for Molly, I think you just put her in exciting fights. And Antonina Shevchenko. I don't think they've already fought.
That was the one she called out after her last spinning back elbow.
Exactly.
Which is fine. That's a fine.
Yeah. Fight. Or maybe you build up. Miranda Maverick called her out on Twitter, but Miranda Maverick, coming off 2 wins.
Miranda Maverick beats her up.
Exactly. I think maybe a Casey O'Neill fight is a good fight. Casey O'Neill, 9-0, undefeated. She'll be looking at that March card in either Cardiff or London. She's coming back from the injury. Her stand-up is decent. Her ground game is good.
Okay.
I think that's the fight to make because Casey O'Neill's ranked. Molly McCann isn't ranked at the moment, or she probably won't be ranked after this week. I think that's the fight to make. But yeah, like you say, I'm not quite sure what the theory was behind putting Molly in with Aaron Blanchfield, who at 23 will be a UFC champion one day. Will she beat Valentina Shevchenko? Who knows? But at some point, she will be the 125 or even 135 if she chooses to go up in weight champion. I've no doubt. She's 23 years old. She's got another 10 years at least in the game.
That's insane, man. Good for her. Gets a solid win. That's a highlight reel for the rest of her career at this point.
Yeah, I think is that her first UFC finish as well. Oh no, she got a standing guillotine choke last time. So this girl, she got head kick knockout on her record. She got an Americano on her record.
23 years old. Holy crap! She's good.
Her only loss comes to Tracy Cortez, who's also in the UFC. So that's one that we could run back down the line. And it's good to see her continuing her win streak. And you briefly mentioned it earlier. I'm glad to see Dan Hooker put manners on his opponent there. He dominated that fight, and his takedown defense was solid. When he did get taken down, his defense was solid, and to finish it with a teep kick to the body, he almost finished it the first time with that teep kick, but Dan Hooker was so good, and like that should have got a post-fight bonus in my opinion, but it is what it is. 0 of 8 takedowns landed for Puelles, and 5 strikes landed total to 37 strikes landed for Dan Hooker. And they weren't just, Dan Hooker was mixing up the speeds in which he was throwing the strikes. He was coming around the guard, he was coming up through the guard, he was leg kicking, he was, jabbing, and then he was defending the takedown. And that you can just tell that the drills that they've done is he's hitting pads and then someone just comes and randomly shoots on him from a strange direction. And because you could just see how reactive he was to every single takedown. It wasn't that, admittedly there were some poor takedowns from Puelles that, I wasn't impressed with. The Imani roll, if it works once, maybe try it again. But you're shooting from way out and trying to pull guard. It's not gonna work against someone. Dan Hooker's seen that thousands of times, and it wasn't. Although they were quite poor shots, it was reactive takedown defense from Dan Hooker was just on point in this one, and I thought it was a really good performance. As was Renato Moicano. A little bit disappointed in Brad Riddell. I don't think he put it as much a fight as he maybe could have. But we said this going in, that Renato Moicano is a far more well-rounded fighter as far as the ground game is concerned. They're pretty even on the feet, but it showed that Renato Moicano's jab just paid the bill for him on Saturday. And that's 3 losses in a row, all by finish now for Brad Riddell, 2 of which came in the first round.
Yeah, this was a big win. This was that was impressive that he got it done. Like he's Moicano is one of the dangers of the division. Like you've got to be on point to beat him. You can't be fighting at 90% to beat him.
No, without a doubt. And, I think the future is really bright for Renato Moicano. I think since that Rafael Fiziev loss when he was knocked out, I think he's really turned a corner. And yes, he's got a lot on his record still. He beat Jai Herbert, beat Alexander Hernandez, but then lost to RDA. But he went 5 rounds on very short notice in an absolute war, took a lot of damage in that fight and still kept on coming forward. And now obviously he's bounced back with the win against Riddell. I want to see Renato Moicano on that Brazil card early next year. I can't remember what the number of the card is, but I want to see him on. He deserves it. He deserves that to be on that fight card.
Oh, I completely co-sign with you. I like him. I like the future of what he's got going on. All right, what else we got? KSW, Cage Warriors were all bangers this weekend. Mayweather did some stupid thing. But next week we have Sergey Spivak versus Derek Lewis. Let's do 30 seconds for it. I don't know. This is stylistic. This is a heavyweight matchup. One guy grapples, one guy punches. Who knows what's going to happen in this one? Any conclusion that we have, whatever happens in the fight, we're going to be like, oh, obviously he just punched him in the head. Oh, obviously he just out-grappled him.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to go either Derek Lewis plods forward, lands a big uppercut, knocks Spivak out, or Spivak probably gets a submission second, third round after dominating the first 2 in the wrestling games. That's it. That's it. And for the rest of the card, I have nothing to say, to be honest. I know it sounds ridiculous. I have Iron Kutalabas fighting. Cool. Andre Fiallo returns against Muslim Salikov. That's a good fight. Rodolfo Vieira fights. The best fight on the card for me is Danny Roberts versus Jack Della Mandela.
I knew it. I was going to
love that fight. I love that fight. That is a really, really good fight, in my opinion. Maddalena
he is good.
Dominating guys. And Danny Roberts is never, ever in a boring fight. I think Roberts reminds me a little bit of Michael Chandler, where if he took a little bit off, he was a little bit more calculated. He maybe could really make a run at welterweight, but he just comes to fight. He just comes to scrap. He comes to put on an exciting fight every time.
Yep.
Outside of that, it's pretty dark. We got Vanessa Demopoulos returning and Marina Moreau's facing Jennifer Meyer, but apart from that, it's a bit dicey, which in my opinion is kind of good, because that means that next weekend's show can be pretty much PFL preview, which I can't say I'm annoyed about.
This weekend we got 2 1 championship events, Glory, small UFC, and then a week after that is a big PFL. And I don't think there's much going on for a little while. We're gonna have to start putting our fight of the years and stuff and upset of the year together here. But we should look back at the old ones too. Anyway, let's get out of here. For myself, Frazer Krohn. Anything else we need to cover off?
No, I think just keep on the MMAsucka.com. We'll be active on that site this week. If, like Tim alluded to, there's plenty going on. We've got big Bellator card this week as well. You've got the rematch between Corey Anderson and Nemkov, and then the Patricky Pitbull versus Usman Nurmagomedov fight. Like we said, though, Bellator isn't. We said in our podcast a few weeks ago, I haven't heard anything about this fight until I came onto Tapology today and just had a look at it. This is arguably their strongest card of the year. Nobody cares.
I know.
No disrespect to the fighters on it, because they're all good competitive fights, but Bellator themselves aren't doing enough to promote it. It's disappointing. I've heard more about the upcoming Invicta card than I have about Bellator, which says everything you need to know about it.
Oh, it's rough. Anyway, let's get out of here. For myself, Frazer Krohn at MMA Sucka. Thanks so much for your time, folks.
Thank you very much.